The machines kept breathing long after the room fell silent. Nnenna Okafor lay perfectly still in the hospital bed. Tubes snaking from her arms, monitors casting a pale blue glow across her face. Her eyes were open. They were always open now. The doctors called it a miracle. That her mind had survived intact while her body refused to cooperate. She could hear every word spoken around her. She could feel the weight of every footstep that crossed her threshold. She just couldn't answer back. And that night, the night everything changed, she heard her husband lean close. She smelled his cologne, the same one she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. She felt the warmth of his breath against her ear. And then she heard the words that would either destroy her or save her, depending on which man was standing in the doorway. Damien Lawson pressed his lips close and whispered, "It's better you die." 4 words, spoken softly, deliberately, like a conclusion he had already made peace with. Nnenna couldn't scream. She couldn't flinch. She couldn't even blink hard enough to signal that she had heard. But somewhere deep inside her chest, something ancient and furious woke up. Something that refused to lie down and be erased. And then, a sound. The door. A soft creak from the hinged side. A shadow moved in the threshold. Still, watching. Damien didn't notice. He straightened up, fixed his tie, and reached for his phone, already composing his expression into something tender and exhausted for the night nurse on her rounds. But the shadow had heard every single word. His name was Taiwan Shin. And in certain rooms, certain cities, certain financial circles that ordinary people never entered, that name was spoken carefully. Never twice in the same sentence. Never loudly. He stood in the doorway of room 412 at Langston Memorial Hospital and looked at the man smoothing his jacket beside the bed of a paralyzed woman. And something behind Taiwan Shin's composed, unreadable face shifted. Not rage, not shock. Something quieter and far more dangerous than either. He had flown 14 hours to be in this hospital. Not for Damien Lawson, for Nnenna. Because 6 years ago, Nnenna Okafor had saved his company from a clause buried so deep in a merger contract that 3 of his senior attorneys had missed it entirely. A single subordinate provision, 12 lines long, written in language so deliberately convoluted, it was almost architectural in its deception. Nnenna had found it on a Friday evening, 40 minutes before the signing ceremony. She had walked calmly into the boardroom, placed her hand flat on the contract, and said, "No one is signing this tonight." She had been 31 years old. Taiwan Shin had never forgotten that moment. He did not deal in gratitude lightly. But when he dealt in it, it was permanent. And now, standing in this doorway, watching a man whisper death to the woman who had once saved everything, he built, Taiwan Shin made a decision. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way all his most consequential decisions were made, quietly, completely, and with absolute follow-through. He stepped into the room. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this one, we tell them every week. You don't want to miss what comes next. Damien turned and saw him. For a moment, his rehearsed expression faltered. He didn't know who Taiwan Shin was by face. Most people didn't. But something about the stillness of the man, The way he occupied the doorway without filling it aggressively. The way his eyes moved to Nnenna first and then to Damien second. The way he did not smile made Damien's instincts fire in a direction he couldn't name. "Can I help you?" Damien asked. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "No," Taewon said. "You cannot." He crossed the room and stood on the opposite side of Nnenna's bed. He looked at her face for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, more to her than to her husband, "I heard you the first time I read that contract. I hear you now." Damien's jaw tightened. "I don't know who you are, but this is a private room, and this is my wife." "I know exactly who she is," Taewon said. "The question is whether you do." There was a pause that felt geological, heavy and layered and very, very old. "You will step away from her care," Taewon said. Immediately. Damien laughed. It was the laugh of a man who had spent 15 years in finance, learning to perform confidence even when his hands were cold. "You don't have any authority here. I'm her husband. I'm her next of kin. I make every decision about her treatment." Taewon looked at him the way a man looks at a document he has already read twice. "I know about the joint account. I know about the 3 transfers. I know about the insurance inquiry you made 6 days after her accident." He paused. "I know about the notarized authorization with the misaligned seal." The laugh died completely. Damien's face changed, just for a second, just enough. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Yes," Taewon replied. "You do?" He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a business card on the nightstand beside Nnenna's hand. "You have 24 hours to voluntarily remove yourself from all medical decision-making authority. If you do not, the conversation becomes significantly less private than this one." He looked once more at Nnenna, then walked out of the room without another word. Nnenna had heard everything. Lying there, unable to move, her brain was running at full capacity. She had always been like this, still on the outside, blazing on the inside. Her colleagues in Manhattan's legal world used to joke that Nnenna Okafor thought in footnotes, that her mind operated in parallel tracks, processing 7 angles simultaneously while she appeared to be simply listening. She was listening now, and what she was processing was not grief. Though grief was there, it was not fear, though fear was threaded through everything. What Nnenna was processing was information, evidence, timeline. She was building a case in the only courtroom she currently had access to, her own mind. Let's go back. Because to understand how a woman ends up paralyzed in a hospital bed, while her husband whispers death and a Korean investment mogul stands quietly in her doorway, you have to understand who Nnenna was before the accident. You have to understand what she built, and you have to understand what some men can't tolerate in the women they marry. Nnenna grew up in Houston, Texas, the eldest daughter of Nigerian immigrants who believed in 2 things above all else: education and endurance. Her father was an engineer. Her mother ran a catering business out of their kitchen until it outgrew the kitchen and became something real. Nnenna watched both of them work with a quiet intensity that she absorbed completely. She graduated top of her class. She won a full scholarship to Columbia Law. She moved to New York at 22 with a single suitcase and an understanding that the city would not give her anything she didn't earn. She earned everything. By 30, She was being called the deal architect in circles where that kind of nickname meant something. She had a reputation for finding the flaw in any agreement, the loose thread in any contract, the clause that everyone else had glossed over because it was buried and technical and deliberately dull. She was precise. She was incorruptible. She was building something real. And then she met Damien Lawson at a charity gala in the spring of her 31st year. And he was charming in a way that disarmed her, precisely because she had spent a decade being suspicious of charm. He was tall. He was funny in a self-deprecating way that felt genuine. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He was attentive in public and tender in private. He said he admired her ambition. He said it like he meant it. He did not mean it. But she wouldn't know that yet. Not for a long time. Not until the whispers started, small ones first, almost tender in their delivery. You work too much. You make everything about your career. Do you ever stop being a lawyer and just be my wife? The jokes at dinner parties that weren't quite jokes. The slight edge in his voice when her name appeared in a publication and not his. The way he started using the word we to describe her accomplishments to other people, quietly absorbing them. Like a plant drawing water from a source it didn't plant. She noticed. Women like Nnenna always notice. But noticing and acting are two different calculations. And she was still running the numbers when the accident happened. Rain, a Wednesday evening in November. A car that skidded on a slick intersection 3 blocks from their apartment. Nnenna was in the back seat of a rideshare. The impact came from the left side. She survived. Her spine did not survive intact. Partial paralysis, the doctor said. Thoracic level. There was sensation, but no reliable motor control below the waist. With intensive therapy, there was possibility. There was always possibility. But possibility is a fragile word. And fragile words do not build themselves. What happened next is what matters. What happened next is that Damien Lawson, who had spent years quietly resenting the architecture of his wife's success, looked at her lying in that hospital bed and saw not a woman to fight for. He saw an exit strategy. He just hadn't counted on Tae-Wan Shin flying in from Seoul. 3 days after the doorway confrontation, a woman walked into Langston Memorial Hospital in a yellow coat that moved like it had somewhere important to be. She had a rolling carry-on, a folder tucked under one arm, and an expression that suggested she had slept on the plane specifically so she could be wide awake for this. Her name was Chisholm Okafor Barnes, Nnenna's younger sister. Chisholm had driven to the airport in Dallas at 4 a.m. after receiving a call she still couldn't fully process. The caller had identified himself only as a colleague of Nnenna's. He had told her 3 things: that her sister was awake and aware, that her legal affairs were at risk, and that she needed to arrive with a specific document that Nnenna had asked her to keep safe 4 years ago. The document was a durable power of attorney, signed, notarized, filed quietly, the way Nnenna filed everything that mattered. Without drama, without announcement, with the calm certainty that some contingencies needed to be prepared for even when you hoped you'd never use them. Chisholm had kept it in a fireproof box in her home office. She had never asked why Nnenna gave it to her. She had simply kept it. Now she was walking through the hospital corridor, rolling carry-on rattling softly behind her, yellow coat flapping, looking for room 412. She found it. She found Nnenna. And for a long moment, standing in the doorway, Chisholm Okafor Barnes couldn't breathe. Because Nnenna was awake. Her eyes were clear, her face was exhausted and pale and carrying a weight that no one should have to carry alone. But she was there. She was entirely there. Chisholm crossed the room and took her sister's hand. She didn't say anything for a full minute. She just held on. Then quietly, "I'm here." Nnenna couldn't speak yet. The doctor said she might regain partial speech with time, but her eyes said everything. They moved to the folder Chisholm was carrying. They held. Chisholm understood. She placed the durable power of attorney on the bed beside her sister's hand. "I've got it," she said. "I've got you. If you're still watching up to this point, type, 'I'm still here' in the comment section. Because this story is about to get even heavier, and we want to know who's taking this journey with us." Chisholm didn't sleep that night. She sat in the hospital chair and began doing what her sister would have done. She started reading. She pulled up the joint bank account on her phone, logging in with credentials Nnenna had shared with her years ago for exactly this kind of emergency. What she found made her stomach drop. 3 transfers, each one sitting just below the threshold that would have triggered automatic fraud alerts. Not accidental, deliberate, carefully calibrated. $78,000 in total. Moved across a period of 9 days following the accident while Nnenna was unconscious and Damien was performing grief for the nursing staff. She kept reading. The mother's jewelry. Nnenna had inherited a set of gold pieces from their mother. Not expensive by market standards, but irreplaceable by every other measure. Chisholm found a receipt from a Newark pawn exchange dated 11 days after the accident. The signature on the receipt was not Nnenna's. It was a forgery. A good one, but not good enough. She found the insurance inquiry, an email thread between Damien and a broker, initiated 6 days after Nnenna's accident, discussing the terms of a $2 million life insurance policy. The thread was framed as routine. It was not routine. There was nothing routine about the timing. And then she found the authorization document. A notarized form granting Damien expanded financial authority over Nnenna's accounts and assets. Signed in Nnenna's name at a time when Nnenna was lying sedated in an ICU. The seal was real. The notary's registration checked out. But when Chisholm photographed it and sent it to a forensic specialist, Taiwan's team had already quietly engaged. The response came back in 2 hours. The seal was misaligned by exactly 1 millimeter. The paper stock was inconsistent with the notary firm's standard supply. The signature, and this was the part that made Chisholm have to put her phone down and stare at the ceiling for a full 3 minutes. The signature had been practiced. There were pressure inconsistencies that suggested multiple rehearsal attempts on the same hand. Someone had spent time learning to forge Nnenna Okafor's signature. That wasn't a crime of opportunity. That was a crime of preparation. Chisholm walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was just beginning to come up, painting the buildings in shades of amber and gray. She thought about her sister lying in that bed for the past 3 weeks, aware and unable to speak, and she wondered how much Nnenna already knew. She wondered if lying there, running those parallel tracks in that blazing mind, Nnenna had already assembled the same picture. She turned back to the room. Nnenna was watching her. Her eyes were steady, calm, in the way that only people who have already accepted the worst can be calm. And in them, Chisholm could see it clearly. Yes, she knew. She had known for a while. Chisholm walked back to the bed and sat down. She took her sister's hand again. "We're going to build the whole case," she said quietly. "Everything, every transaction, every document, every date. And when you can speak, Nnenna, you are going to walk into that courtroom. Whatever walking looks like for you. And you are going to tell them everything." Nnenna's fingers tightened around hers. It was the first movement she had made in 22 days. Damien was still playing the role. This was something that impressed and horrified the nursing staff simultaneously, though none of them had enough information yet to name what they were observing. He brought flowers twice a week. He spoke to the attending physician in a voice that trembled with practiced concern. He organized a prayer circle among their social acquaintances that he did not attend himself. He was good at this. He had been performing consideration for years. The performance was so embedded in his daily operation that he sometimes seemed to forget it was a performance. He would stand at Nnenna's bedside and stroke her hand and speak to her in the gentle, patient tones of a devoted husband. And somewhere beneath it, in whatever portion of Damien Lawson still retained self-awareness, he would be calculating. The life insurance payout, the asset liquidation, the apartment in their names, the consulting retainer she had signed the year before with a private equity group that contained a survivorship clause he had read 3 times. He was building a future. He was building it on the assumption that the woman in the bed would stop being an obstacle. What he had not built into his calculations was Taiwan Shin. They met again in the hospital corridor on a Thursday afternoon. Damien was leaving. Taiwan was arriving. They saw each other from 20 feet and both slowed to a stop. Damien spoke first. He had decided in the days following their first encounter that aggression was his best posture. "You have no legal standing here. I've spoken to my attorney. Whatever you think you have, you don't have enough." Taiwan looked at him for a moment. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. "Then what are you?" "I'm a witness," Taiwan said. "I heard what you said to your wife. I will repeat it in any room you choose." Damien's face contracted. "You misheard, and even if you didn't, it would be your word against mine." "Yes," Taiwan said simply. "My word against yours." He let that sit for a moment, just a moment. Then he walked past Damien toward room 412. Damien stood alone in the corridor. Something cold moved through him. Not guilt. Damien Lawson had not felt guilt in a very long time. What he felt was the particular chill of a man who has overestimated his own invisibility. Inside the room, Taiwan sat across from Annie, and for the first time, he spoke to her not about Damien, not about documents, not about what he knew. He spoke to her about the merger. He told her about the Friday evening, the boardroom, the signing ceremony, the moment she placed her hand on that contract. He told her that he had tried to find a way to repay that debt for 6 years, and he had concluded that no financial transaction was adequate, that the only currency that matched what she had given him was presence. He said, "I don't know what the next months will look like, but I want you to know that whatever resources are needed, they are available, not as charity, as an accounting long overdue." Nnenna's eyes were wet. She didn't look away. He stayed for 40 minutes. He did not fill the silence unnecessarily. He simply sat in it with her, two people in a room where terrible things had happened, deciding together, without words, that terrible things were not the ending. Week 6 brought something the fatal doctors had described as possible but not guaranteed. Nnenna began to speak, not full sentences, not yet. The first sounds were effortful and rough, like a machine restarting after a long dormancy. But by the middle of week 6, she was producing words. Short ones. Clear ones. The first thing she said, not to Damien, not to the doctors, but to Chisholm, who was sitting beside her reviewing documents on a laptop, was this: "My files." Chisholm looked up. "My files," Nnenna said again, and her voice was hoarse and thin, but the precision in it was entirely unchanged. The laser-sharp specificity of a woman who had always known exactly what she was asking for. Chisholm brought the files. Nnenna reviewed everything: the bank records, the insurance thread, the forged authorization, the jewelry receipt. She went through them slowly, her eyes moving across each page with that familiar systematic intensity. She didn't react dramatically. She didn't cry. She simply read. And as she read, the case in her mind that she had been building for 6 weeks from fragments and second-hand information became something concrete, something real, something prosecutable. And then she found something no one else had found yet. Buried in a series of financial documents she had been compiling before the accident, a routine audit she had been conducting as part of a private client engagement, were traces of something that went beyond marital fraud. Wire transfers that intersected with regulated securities accounts. A pattern of transactions that, assembled correctly, suggested unauthorized leverage in instruments Damien had no disclosed position in. Cross-referencing with the timing and the amounts, what Nnenna was looking at was exposure to federal securities fraud. This was no longer a divorce case. This was a federal matter. She looked at Chisholm. "Call Taiwan," she said. Her voice was steadier now. The machine was remembering how to run. "And call my firm." The media found the story before the legal process formally began. A journalist who had covered Nnenna's career wrote a piece that was careful and factual and thorough, built from public records and sourced from 3 people who had observed the hospital corridor confrontation. The headline was precise. The piece did not editorialize. It did not need to. Within 48 hours, Damien Lawson was placed on administrative leave from his firm, pending internal review. Within 72 hours, his social circle, the charity galas, the golf weekends, the dinner parties where he had performed the devoted husband, went quiet in the particular way that social circles go quiet when they suspect they have been performing alongside a fraud and are not sure how much their own proximity will cost them. His attorney issued a statement. It was brief and generated nothing. Taiwan gave a formal deposition. He was precise, unhurried, and comprehensive. He described the doorway. He described the words. He described Damien's expression. He described his own response. He did not embellish. He did not need to. The forensic evidence was presented. The forged authorization, the misaligned seal, the bank transfers, the insurance inquiry, the jewelry receipt, the securities records. Chisholm testified about the durable power of attorney, about the phone call, about the fireproof box, about arriving in the yellow coat at 4 in the morning because her sister had prepared for exactly this contingency 4 years before it was needed. Because women like Nnenna Okafor so prepared for things they hoped would never happen with the same precision they applied to everything else. And then it was Nnenna's turn. She entered the courtroom in a wheelchair. She had insisted on this. Her physical therapist had suggested that she had enough recovered function to attempt assisted standing for brief periods. And there had been a conversation about optics, about what image would be most powerful, most affecting. Nnenna had ended that conversation in 2 sentences. "I am not managing an image," she said. "I am telling the truth, and the truth is that I am still recovering, and a wheelchair is what the truth looks like today." She moved to the front of the courtroom. The room was full. It was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when everyone in them is paying a particular kind of attention. Not the polite attention of obligation, but the involuntary attention of people in the presence of something they instinctively understand to be significant. Damien sat at the defendant's table. He had aged in the months since the accident, not dramatically, but visibly. The performance was exhausted. There was nothing left to perform for. The prosecutor presented the evidence. It took 3 hours, every document, every transaction, every date, every dollar amount, the forged signature, the insurance inquiry, the jewelry, the securities exposure, Taiwan's testimony, Chisholm's testimony, the forensic reports. Damien's attorney made arguments that were competent and insufficient. Then Nnenna spoke. She had written her victim impact statement by hand over several evenings in the West Village apartment where she was staying while her own home, still legally entangled, remained inaccessible. She had revised it twice. The final version was 1 page. She read it without looking up. "I want to address what was done to me and what was attempted. The financial crimes are documented. The forgery is documented. The insurance inquiry is documented. The court has everything it needs from an evidentiary standpoint, and I have nothing to add to what the facts have already said." She paused. The room held its breath. "What I want to speak to is something the documents cannot fully capture. You did not try to destroy my finances, Damien. You tried to destroy my agency. You looked at a woman who could not move, who could not speak, who could not defend herself, and you decided that her inability to respond meant her absence. You made decisions over her body as though she had already stopped existing. You practiced her signature. You practiced it. That is not a crime of passion. That is a crime of contempt. A slow, deliberate contempt for a person you decided was no longer worth contending with." She looked up then, not at Damien, at the room. "I was never absent. I heard everything. And everything I heard, I remembered. Because women like me, women who have been told their whole lives that their precision and their endurance are inconveniences, we remember everything. Silence. Complete silence. And then, from somewhere in the back of the courtroom, someone began to clap. Just one person at first, and then another. And then the room made a sound that was not quite applause and not quite anything else. A collective exhaling, a release. The sound of people who had been holding something and finally letting it go. Damien Lawson pleaded guilty to 2 federal charges: wire fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. His attorney negotiated the plea. 7 years. Federal sentencing guidelines. He stood when the sentence was read, and his face was a mask of nothing, which was perhaps the most honest thing his face had ever expressed. He was escorted out in handcuffs, outside the courthouse, in the thin November light, almost exactly 1 year after the accident. Nnenna sat in her wheelchair on the top of the access ramp and let Chisholm push her toward the waiting car. And then she said quietly, "Wait." Chisholm stopped. Nnenna placed her hands on the wheels. She breathed. Then she pushed herself upright. Her legs found the ground. Her legs, which had been running on partial signals for months, which had been relearning the language of weight and pressure and balance in daily therapy sessions that she attacked with the same systematic intensity she applied to every contract she had ever reviewed. Her legs held. She stood, not for long, 30 seconds, maybe 40. But she stood, unassisted, in the November light, outside the courthouse where her husband had just been sentenced. And she looked out at the city that had never given her anything she didn't earn. Taiwan was standing nearby. He had been present for the verdict. He had not been present for Nnenna's statement. He had listened from outside the courtroom, through the partially open door, the way he had listened in the hospital doorway, standing in thresholds, witnessing. He did not cross to her. He did not make it a moment between them. He simply saw her standing, and he nodded once, with the particular gravity of a person acknowledging a debt that has now been finally paid in a currency no one had anticipated. In the months that followed, Nnenna rebuilt. She moved into a modest apartment in the West Village, 2 bedrooms, exposed brick, morning light. Chisholm stayed for the first 3 months. They ate breakfast together every morning. They argued about small things. They let the grief move through them in the ordinary, undramatic way that grief actually moves, which is not like a wave, but like weather, sometimes heavy, sometimes barely present, always eventually passing. Nnenna restructured her legal practice. She had been thinking, in that hospital bed, in all those months of enforced stillness, about the work she wanted to do going forward. The deal architecture would continue. She was still and would always be the person who found the hidden clause. But she added a new practice area: financial abuse litigation, protective legal frameworks for individuals, primarily women, whose economic independence had been attacked, eroded, or stolen by the people closest to them. Her first clients came from people who had followed her story. Women who had seen the coverage. Women who recognized something in Nnenna's case that they were not yet ready to name in their own lives, but needed to see named somewhere, by someone, in a room where it counted. She took their cases. She worked them with the same precision she brought to everything. She won. Taiwan visited once, in the spring. He brought nothing. He sat in her apartment kitchen and drank the tea Chisholm made, and talked to Nnenna about a contract dispute that had nothing to do with anything personal. That was simply a complex legal question he wanted a sharp mind to think through. They talked for 2 hours. They talked the way colleagues talk, directly, technically, without performance. When he left, Nnenna sat with the residue of the conversation for a long moment. She had been thinking about what to call what Taiwan had done. Rescue was the wrong word. He had not rescued her. He had heard something. He had made one call. He had shown up to a deposition. He had done the things that were in his power to do. And he had done them because he was a person who honored obligations and had the resources to honor this one without damage to himself. What he had given her was simpler and rarer than rescue. He had witnessed her. In the hospital bed, when no one else in that room was treating her as a person still fully present and fully deserving of defense, he had stood in the doorway and looked at her and seen her, and that had been enough. Not to save her. She had saved herself from the inside. In that blaze of parallel processing, while the machines breathed softly and her husband spoke. But enough to buy time. Enough to make a call. Enough to show up. She was thinking about this, about the difference between being rescued and being witnessed, about how much of what we call help is actually just someone agreeing at a critical moment to see you. When her phone buzzed, a new client inquiry. She set down her tea and opened the message. She read it twice, the way she read everything that mattered. Then she began to type, "Before we close this story, here is what we want you to sit with. Nnenna Okafor did not survive because someone saved her. She survived because she refused, even in complete silence, even in paralysis, even in a room where her own husband had already decided she was finished, to stop being present. She continued to think. She continued to build. She continued to trust that the case she was assembling in her mind would one day find its way into a room where it could be heard. Survival is sometimes silent. It does not always look like action. Sometimes it looks like a woman lying perfectly still, hearing everything, remembering everything, waiting. And if you've stayed with this story all the way to this moment, we think you understand something about endurance that a lot of people don't want to talk about. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't perform. Type "strength is quiet" in the comments if this story moved you. We read every single one. And if you believe that justice sometimes requires one person to simply stand in a doorway and refuse to look away, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because next week we're telling you the story of a woman who discovered the truth about her marriage at her own anniversary dinner. In front of 40 guests, a string quartet, and a secret that had been kept for 11 years. You will not want to miss it. Subscribe. Stay close. We'll see you there.